Hello, hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into the Odd Thoughts Podcast. At the Odd Thoughts Podcast, we like to talk about the everyday odd thoughts, have conversations on relatable topics, and discuss whatever comes to mind. My name is Gunther, and I am your host. Welcome to episode 41. For episode 41, I wanted to start off by talking about popularity, talking about kind of the likability that you have amongst people or kind of the perceived likability that people might have towards you. Then I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about side hustles. I think, side hustles, side jobs have always been kind of a thing, but it feels like nowadays with internet and it feels like it's just more of like a culture behind it. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about mirroring. Mirroring is the kind of unconscious, mimicking in a way of other people's attitudes, not in a mocking way, but just in a way to kind of be more adaptable in certain social interactions. Lastly, I thought I would have some fun talking about an article I had read about the origin of clothing. Something that I think like I don't think too much about, but as I like to think about ancient humans, it was a fun topic to kind of read about. So if you want to listen, sorry, if you want to listen to any of these topics, keep tuning in. I appreciate y'all tuning in. Please enjoy. How's everybody doing though? I hope everybody's doing okay. We are a few weeks into 2024 and things are going good. I hope everything is going good for you. I'm only trying to just look forward to, I'm not trying to look forward to like all the specific little things that are going to happen this year, but just looking forward to a generally good year, right? I think I'm always trying to keep my mentality to think about the next days is going to be a little bit better and don't have any perceived expectations. And I have goals, as I think a lot of people do, as I hope most people do. I just think we got to make sure that we stick to this feeling good about trying. And overall, just look at the wins that we have this year and make sure that's kind of the mentality that we continue to have for from 2025, 2026, future years to come. I kind of have this mentality that this year I'd like to try to set myself up as much as possible for the future. I wish I'm always trying to do that. I think everybody's trying to do that, and not a bad thing to do. But I'm doing okay. I know that I've been working hard on I've got like a lot of outlines lined up for the podcast, so I'm working hard on other things. With the kind of getting ahead on some podcasts, I only know that I'm gonna free myself up more and more with other things. And one thing I'm really trying to channel right now is writing. I kind of lost a little bit of like the spark for writing for a little bit there, but I've gained it back. I've had some ideas for stories in my head. I don't know, they're always half done and never fully thought out, but I got a few ideas. And I've kind of just been writing them down as I've thought of them. And if I can kind of expand on them as I go along, then that's kind of cool. If it's just one thing that I had an idea for, then that's what I got. Maybe you try to throw a couple of them together or something like that, right? Where maybe they don't make total sense, but as long as it's a good story, I struggle sometimes thinking about like I try to bring some sort of like realism in a way, or like there's certain things I want to explain with a story, or I want to try to give some detail with, but there are a lot of things in stories that you don't always need to explain. And it's all about kind of what happens in the story. So if you give a background on someone that doesn't really matter, or if you're given like too much of a history of something that's not really relevant, then yada yada yada. That's where I struggle with a certain maybe narrative language that I want to try to give myself. And I think part of a creative process that I'm still dealing with. I don't know to say like what I like, 'cause I don't know what my process is. Like I'm always trying to develop new things and trying to develop what I like. And I like, I'm always going to like different things. So there's always going to be definitely a lot of different influences. That's one thing I'm working on. And hopefully this whole year is kind of laid out with more creativity in that way where I can kind of feed off that creativity and benefit off that creativity as much as possible. And just finding a voice first of all is what I got to do. Finding my expression. So that's what I'm doing. And I hope everybody else is doing the same thing. I hope that everybody is finding things to get into. It's the same skills, hobbies, things to make you feel good about life outside of just like normal existence, or feel good about normal existence, and just make sure you're passionate about that. But yeah, I hope like I said, I hope everybody's doing good. I'm doing good. Let's hop into episode 41. Whether or not you care about what people think of you, there is always, I think, a slight hope that there is some sort of likableness you have amongst people you interact with. I don't think it's a bad idea to try to put your best self forward, have a small intention of getting others to like you. With the people you have formed connections with, there may be a certain kind of perceived popularity. Whether you are truly close to those people or just happen to know a number of people, popularity can be defined in multiple ways. There becomes a nature, I think, with status amongst like the people you know. To be liked by others, maybe particularly the most inside your social group, there is a social dominance you happen to gain. It's not like you necessarily want to dominate them, anybody. It's just like a status thing. We may not seek so-called dominant, to be called the dominant person amongst our social circles, but person who is considered most liked has a kind of rank, right? Because of that. Inevitably, it'll always seem that there is a most popular person that we all may know in our lives, or someone we consider to be extremely likable. I don't think it's important to like think in terms of how like popular are you are in like a group of people, but inevitably that's something that does happen. What matters is getting along with others. And if they happen to show a level of attention to you and appreciate you in a certain way, just appreciate being seen. You know what I'm saying? So popularity can be defined, like I said, in multiple ways, but it's a likeness from others. It's kind of it helps maybe even give a sense of belonging. When you feel like, you're liked by others, you have like a likability amongst a certain amount of people, it makes you feel like you belong. It makes you feel like people actually genuinely like you. There is like like I said, a perceived popularity, which is if you ask other people and people say maybe that you are like the most popular, that I like, based off of like the people that you do know, you're likable, like the most likable amongst them. There can also be kind of like a sociometric popularity, like a number of connections that you have. You may not be the most likable out of everybody, but you know a certain number of people. So just based of like off of that, you're popular. However that makes sense. I always think that most people think of perceived popularity. I think it's really mostly like it's what people say about you. If you are the most liked and people kind of say that they like you the most, then that's kind of the popularity that, at least for me, feels most meaningful. Whether popularity feels meaningful or not. There is a certain like likability and status that we kind of have with popularity. There's a wanted social status dominance, not necessarily to be like more dominant than everybody else, but you want to be likable by others. So you might try to present yourself in a certain way, or when you communicate with people, you act a certain way or whatever. And I think like when you're truly a likable person, when you truly have like a likability, it's a friendliness kind of added with an ability to read others. Not only are you kind of a kind person and you present yourself in such a way, but you kind of also know how to interact with others. Not only are people kind of attracted to that friendliness, but then when people do come towards you or you come towards others, you know how to kind of read that situation. I think that helps. I think that's not maybe the necessarily two basis is friendliness seems like that gets you pretty a long way, but you do want to know how to read other people and interact with them accordingly. Social status is kind of just based how many people you know. Really, I mean, how many people they say you are likable even. I think that's kind of where what social status is defined as. And I don't think we should all be shooting for the highest social status as possible, but you want to be, in a high point amongst the people you know. It doesn't matter how everybody thinks about you, but based off of the people that you know, how likable, do they consider you? When you have like that high status, there's a certain level of attractiveness you hold, not necessarily a physical attractive, well, maybe a physical attractiveness, but there's like people want to like they want to come towards you. They want to, they want to talk to you. Maybe that you have some sort of like impressive resources. Like you kind of have the cool items, you have cool things, and you're a you're a social dominant person. You're someone that like has all the good things going for them. You seem most impressive. And more popularity equals more attention, 100%, and more influence. So, as you know, that's kind of what leads to that high status is like as you become a little more likable and you receive a little bit of more attention from people, it kind of has like this weird influence on others. Sometimes for good or bad. It depends on how you are. Like depends on what type of person you are. But I think as there is with most things, there is definitely risks with popularity when you're seeking popularity. I think maybe I think this is a sentiment with a lot of people is you can get a little addicted to praise and attention. You want that stuff. You crave attention and you crave a little praise. So when you go from, having a bunch of it and then at times when there's none, you get addicted to that. You want it so bad. And when yeah, when you go from having a lot of people around you or everybody kind of likes you to having not anybody, that can experience a chronic loneliness. I think no matter like if you go from a big group to a small group, as long as the people that in your group like you, then I think you should look at that. But inevitably, that could be pretty lonely to go from a large group to a small group. Increased anxiety, I guess, with like social interactions or an anxiety about oneself. You kind of feel like that. You're like, why am I not as popular? Why aren't as many people liking me? I think stuck in when stuck in adolescence when rewards are stronger, right? So it's harder to accept to adapt for their life because you feel like it's more like the more good things come out of it when you're popular when you're younger, and then you realize when you're a little older, not as many good things. It's like popularity is whatever. When you're a kid, it's like people like you and they might give you gifts and your friends might buy you things or like whatever yada yada yada. But that's kind of harder when you get a little older to adapt to that further life because then not as many people are interacting with you and you may still be likable, but there's not as many people complimenting you or giving you things or whatever. From the highs to the lows, that can be a pretty big crash. You want to avoid loneliness, right? I think that's something that we all shoot for. So being around people isn't a terrible thing. Wanting a little bit of that popularity, or at least have likableness, is okay. Or just having a certain number of people you surround yourself with. Isolation sucks. And add that with a little bit of rejection where people don't want to be around you, that makes it feel a little worse. I think like that can make unpopularity feel a little more impactful in a way where even though you may be a good person and you may have likable qualities, because of this isolation you have through XYZ, it just feels like it hurts. And whether you know what popularity, whether you've been to the highs of the popularity or not, it still hurts. You know what I'm saying? There is definitely 100% a balance in popularity that I think we look for. You want to try to have like, a few relationships that you're close enough to feel accepted in, whether it's a handful of people, maybe a few more, as long as you're accepted by them, as long as they like you and you like them, and there's a mutual respect that goes on. You want to seek out people with those shared interests as well, shared values that share the same things that you do. I think that helps with connecting with people and when you develop like when you know people, developing that kind of connection system where you're making plans with people, accepting invitations, and physically making, going along with people. I think that's when it becomes more influential. That's when it may, that's it. Social interactions and being friends with people, those relationships should be impactful, inside. And, it doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter how many friends you have, it's cool to have a lot of friends, but nobody's going to think you're awesome because you have lot more friends than other people. It's just about being likable amongst those that you do surround yourself with. We all naturally crave like social rewards. We want to be admired and praised for that stuff. And I think it's important to sometimes like avoid those fleet feelings of admiration. Like it's great to have praise and it's great when people give you that attention, but to go out and constantly seek it or expect it is not okay. It's just gonna hurt when you don't get it then. But like I said, it's a natural thing to want to be admired, right? And stopping with like I think a big thing to help with like that, rejection from popularity or whatever, or like you feel like you're excluded from popularity is like if you're a social media person, don't check for likes on social media. Who cares? If you post a picture because you want to post a picture, that's great. But if all the people that follow you, like all your friends, if they aren't liking it, then that's okay. They got other things that go on, right? Show them the outfit, then send them the picture if you want to be liked by your friends or whatever, right? You should also don't seek the validity by strangers. Who gives a shit? Sorry for my sorry, excuse me. Sorry for my language. And I think an important thing is you gotta sometimes stop also bragging about accomplishments to, acquaintances. Like if you're close to people, then obviously people want to hear about your successes, but when you're kind of holding like these certain things, these certain aspects of yourself on your shoulder, and that's what you kind of lead with, I think it always going to let you down. People don't always want to hear about the bragging. I don't think anybody wants to hear the bragging unless like they shoot back with the bragging. And obviously, if it's around people that you love and you're telling them about your accomplishments, then that's not bragging necessarily. That's just sharing good news. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Don't allow the envious feelings of others too. I think that's a big thing. Is you got to make sure that like you don't try to chase a popularity by like having what other people have. You're jealous of other people, so that excludes you from like liking other people. Yeah, it's that's just not how it works. And I think in general, when you're making connections with people and you're forming some sort of like likableness, some sort of popularity amongst people, it's important to somehow be an initiator. That's something that you got to initiate conversation, you got to initiate interactions. You know, and then when you're interacting with other people, make sure they feel included in a conversation. That helps with likability. Not just like only telling yourself about yourself or like listening to everybody else, but this one person. You want everybody to feel included, everybody to feel like they're contributing to this social interaction. Inclusivity of others increases likability that others have towards you. Also, and you can impact others positively. Positively. Sorry, this is a jumbled word. Sorry. But like always making sure that you have a good interaction with people, that helps with likableness. Even if you're not like always talking to someone or you're not friends with everybody, just to making sure that every interaction you do have is a positive one. But popularity is defined in multiple ways, and it's a harsh thing when you seek it and you don't get it, or maybe you come from the highs of popularity, the high social status to a low social status. But having likability is a good thing. You want to be friendly and you want to have an ability to get along with others and interact with others accordingly. So having a certain popularity amongst the people you know is okay to have. Just make sure that you're likable is what's most important. In today's economy, it feels like everybody's looking to make a little bit more money, right? I think that's maybe always been true in all economies is everybody wants a little extra cash, a little bit extra money to feel a little more safe, or maybe you need that extra money, right? I'm always kind of thinking like, I don't mind like sitting at a 9 to 5 and doing a good job, like and having a good job, but sometimes it's just not enough. Some places don't want to pay you a certain amount, and maybe you feel like you deserve a certain amount, but that's not always going to correlate to certain companies, right? So you try to find ways to make money outside of main careers, right? I think something popular that I hear a lot about online, and I mean, I feel like I've always been maybe popular. But a lot I hear about is like side hustles, right? I think side hustles are a great thing. These little money making, not schemes necessarily, but money making plans that you have outside of your main job. Or maybe you haven't, have enough side hustles that where that's kind of like your main career. You know what I'm saying? Um, I just it's some way of just like making money to use as extra. I think side hustles are sometimes related with excess money, not excess in a bad way, but making sure you have a little bit of extra money. And sometimes maybe even like you have certain side hustles that the money you make just goes right back into it. I'm very much so on that like side of like it's an interesting thought. Especially today, like most of the stuff that I see like on social media and stuff like that, it's a lot of like work from home things. It's like things that you could do for like a couple hours on your computer, and it's like proofreading something, or checking products or something like that. And some people make some good money from that. Or like digital marketing has become like a really big thing, and it's kind of seen as this like easily accessible thing. And Maybe it is. Maybe it truly is. But when does it become like too much? When does it become like if it's too sought after of like a hustle? Is it really like gonna help at all? Like the point of the side hustle is like you want to make something out of it. But when everybody's kind of competing for the same side hustle, then why are you doing it? Are you doing it for a hobby, which isn't necessarily a bad thing? Like I said, you can make money to go back into the side hustle. You make more money to do more of this thing. But I was just when think of side hustles, I want to make money. I want to try to make as much money as possible, right? So realistically, like with myself, like I always think about like if I want to set I want to use side hustles as like something to maybe build into like something greater. Like a side hustle starts as like something small and then it goes into a business, which fair enough, right? I always like if I had some money, I would think about like I remember one episode, like a few episodes, I forget how many ago, but I talked about like upscaling, upcycling like furniture and stuff like that, like repurposing furniture. And I would do the shit out of that. Excuse my language. Like get a couch and refurbish it, make sure it's like refilled and or chairs and tables and I could always make my own, I suppose, but like that's the fun thing about like there's stuff out there that you could just reuse, repurpose. It's out there for you to do. So I think about doing that and like selling that back out. And but that's a big thing is like how much profit am I going to really make off of that? Like I don't want to like if I buy a table or yeah, I would try to do my best to see if I can get tables for cheap, like $5, and then so if I charge 20, people aren't going to feel too bad about it or something like that. Or if I could find it on the side of the road and then it's like $10, I'm basically made $10. Pay back for the supplies maybe type thing. But I'm always trying to I like the idea of repurposing things. So like even with um housing, like people flip houses all the time, but it feels like then they make it like gentrified in a way or like they make it so upscaled that it's not as the same as other houses. And so if I had some money, like I would love to like try to think about like having like a little side business or a side hustle where I flip houses, ergonomically, where like I use it as a budget way, where like everything is like up to date. That's the main thing is that the bones are good and the appliances are good, and that you get clean water, you get good gas, and like the heating and the AC works. And I don't need to fill it with a bunch of like fancy marble and fancy furniture, right? I like the idea that I'll throw things in there for like future families, like give a bed, like or like a couch and maybe a TV. You know what I'm saying? Just throw the necessities in there. Most of the time, I think a lot of people want to like turn these houses into their own, right? So, give people the chance to do that. Flip houses just so, so that the bones are good and make sure the actual house is good. I could see that being like a bigger project and I could see myself doing a lot more with that than upscaling for or upcycling furniture. But there's so many other like when did like I said, I've always think of maybe try to make side hustles like into side jobs, into side businesses, into like actual full functioning things. Like what if I like I don't do art as like a professional thing, right? But when I start doing art, is that like basically a side hustle? Because I don't know if I can put myself fully into it yet because like I'm not that confident, but eventually I'll get confident in my art, right? So then it becomes like an actual thing. It's not just like it's an actual hustle. It's not a side hustle. You know what I'm saying? But but like what I'm saying. I think everybody's looking to make a little money some way, and if I feel like you have to be at least into that side hustle because if you might not like your actual full time job, so why then do like another job that's like just as boring, or like it's some people just need to want to make money, and that's the whole point. Is like you're making money, so whether it does whatever for you or doesn't do whatever for you, it's sometimes it's about that money, and I think like about like if I knew someone that was like, "Hey, like, you want to come paint houses with me for like, you could paint one house a week for like a couple hundred extra dollars." It's like, yeah, I'd fucking do that. Sorry for my language. Sorry for my language. But like, that's easy. That's like a side hustle technically, because I wouldn't be doing it as a full time thing. Do it a couple times a week or whatever. Like, it's probably hard work, but I mean, like, I'm only doing it a couple times a week. I don't consider that a full time job. You know what I'm saying? But I'd do that 100%. Or if I knew people that needed like, oh, like, hey, could you clean my house? Like, I'll give you like $100 if you clean my house like once a week or something like that. And I had enough people like, I go a couple hours here, clean this house, go a couple hours here, you know, a lot like 3 days a week to that. That's a good side hustle right there. The idea is, I think a lot of times it's like you want to make it as like what like passive as possible as of money. That's kind of the idea behind side hustles now is like it's supposed to be some sort of passive income where it's just constantly making money, which is awesome. But if you really want to try to maximize that kind of passive income, I would suggest like making, putting a lot of full time into it until it becomes that. So with side hustles, it's like there's going to be a little effort. I think most side hustles have a little effort. You're going to have to put in some work, as I guess most things are. But I just think you have to put a little so a little work into the side hustle, especially if you want to make some moolah. No point of doing something that's going to only bank a couple of dollars, especially if you're putting in like effort. If you're like traveling for something, or like you got to use a certain amount of supplies of whatever for that job. But I think it's such a popular thing, and it always been a popular thing, right? It's like everybody has always had side jobs. If you know people that need some help, like if you have like especially in Texas, like if you got a truck and like enough people that just need things moved, it's like you just like pay for gas, like pay me $10 of gas, and like that's good enough. You know what I'm saying? Like you want to do it out of the generosity of your heart sometimes, most of the time, but you make a little money off of that. You know what I'm saying? If a friend of yours like says like, hey, like I have a friend, maybe that's not your friend, but like I have a friend that needs some help, like charge them some money, say like, hey, $50, to but I'm always thinking of like I just get a little struggled with that because like but what if your full time job becomes like side hustles? What if you're always doing a little job here, a little job there, and nothing super reliable? But then again, like a 9 to 5, like you can just be like twiddling away at a 9 to 5 and not really maximizing like a certain like potential you have with another thing. But yeah, it's a tough thing. But I think it's awesome to think about having side hustles though. Truly. I think if you have that mentality of like I think you should have the mentality of making extra cash. Like we need it. Everybody needs a little extra money. So if you're stepping into doing these side hustles or doing these extra jobs, you got to make sure that you're doing it for money. You're not always going to love what you're doing and you're not always going to appreciate the things that are going on, but as long as you're making some good money, then it's all worth it in the end. When we are interacting with others, we might sometimes mirror how others behave. Subconsciously, people will sometimes copy the attitudes of the other person they are talking to. Not in a mocking way, but in a way to kind of personalize the conversation. Mirroring is an unconscious imitation in the way of trying to connect better with someone and be a bit more adaptable in certain social situations. And also mirroring works in like sorry, I'm struggling with that. In development, mirroring in like young humans when you're growing up, it kind of helps like to mirror your parents and like other figures in your life to kind of come up with like the concept of self to figure out how to do things. A sort of like monkey see, monkey do type thing. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't hurt necessarily to allow yourself to like ease an interaction with someone else with a bit of like authentic mimicking basically. It's like I said, it's not mocking to mirror someone's like attitude. You're just trying to like ease a conversation. You're trying to be a little more susceptible. Mirroring is literally just imitating others behaviors unconsciously. It's an unnoticed copying of someone's attitude in certain social situations. Sorry, stuttering a little bit. But like it's just unconscious. You're not intentionally imitating someone. It's not necessarily also like a grand thing where like you're doing every single little thing they do, but it's just like an energy. Like when someone kind of comes with a certain calming presence, you're kind of calming. If someone's upset, you might be a little upset too. It's just kind of what it is, or like the nature of a conversation. Like you just might kind of adapt to that. And it's definitely not a way to be fake, right? You're not trying to be fake. You're not trying to like force a certain way to talk or force the interaction to be a certain way for yourself. It's like I said, it's all to be adaptable to social situations. It doesn't mean you're not authentic. It's just it offers a better interaction with others, a better rapport. A repart, rapport, right? I just might have messed that. A better like back and forth. There's a lot of ways I think that people do it, kind of thing. There's a lot of like verbal like techniques that people have, and a lot of like nonverbal techniques. When you're talking to someone, you might, if someone's got like a certain pace to their voice, or they got like a certain nature of their language, a little more gruff, or they're a little slower. I think that's like a very big mirroring technique for people. You kind of like, if people are calm, so you're calm in nature, or people are a little more aggressive, so you're aggressive in nature, and people talk fast, so you kind of talk fast. Like I said, sometimes you don't even like you don't usually recognize mirroring too often. It's just a way for your brain to kind of cope with like a social interaction, and just doing your best, like I said, to ease into it. And even with like, there's like a certain thing with like appearance. Like when you hang out with a certain group, or you interact with a certain group of people, you kind of want to look like that. So you end up maybe dressing similar to who you interact with, or you kind of look similar, or you try to like, your body language at times is even similar, right? I think that's a big thing, is like body language is a big thing. If someone presents themselves in a similar gesture, or like they have a lot of hand movements, or they feel a little more proper, or it's a little more laid back or whatever, it's this unconscious thing that you will do. It just like it's just like it's just your brain trying to tell you to relax, man. Just take it easy. And also, like, I think it becomes a lot easier, like, easy, or like, sorry, not a lot easier, but when you share like similar beliefs too, right? I think sometimes, like, when you hear in conversation, like people start talking about certain things, like you'll like start talking about that more, or you try to feed into that more, just by nature. I think by nature of like wanting to talk about that, but that helps you relate. That helps you with that mirroring thing, that kid kind of, be a little bit more adaptable in that social situation. And it's never, like I said, it's important in like a lot of social interactions at times. Like you don't want to be stiff and like unattractable, or not that unapproachable. Sorry. So like you want to kind of like let yourself like feed into whatever is happening. And if it's not for you, then obviously, you don't have to like mirror it in a way that like you're like sticking yourself in a conversation you can't get out. If you want to be a part of a certain social interaction, or you want to be able to like adapt to people, like it's not a bad thing to mirror. And quite, like I said, quite often it's an unnoticed thing. It's an unconscious behavior. You're just kind of doing it because it's like what feels most comfortable. You can't blame your body and your brain for doing that. And like I said, what I was saying earlier is like in infancy, like when you're growing up, when you're young, imitation is very important. It 100% is like something that helps you kind of like, you mimic movements, and you start to associate certain emotions to expressions. Like when someone gets mad, they look this way. When someone gets sad, they look this way. And so that helps with all that development. It's always that proverbial, like your kids are going to do exactly as you do. Like they're going to say what you say, and they're going to walk how you walk. So you got to be careful on what you do. But also in the way of that, that allows a lot of parents to be like, okay, well, I'll teach them how I am. Like I'll allow them to like mimic me, and then one day when all our brains eventually develop, like we all eventually came up with our own concept of self. Unfortunately, not like super deeply. Like a lot of people are like their parents, and even if you try to change that, there's always maybe going to be like that thing that kind of holds on in the back of your head, that you're always going to be like your dad, or you're always going to be like your mom, or something like that. Which, whether or not they're good parents or not, my parents are great, so I don't mind that. But it just teaches you, kid. It teaches you as a kid, like a lot of these things, like, and I think that, and you'll do it a lot because as a kid, you're just not, obviously when you're an infant and you're like really young, you're not aware of a lot of that stuff. So you got to have like someone to lead you with that. You have to have that like example. And a lot of times, like mirroring, like I said, mirroring is effective. It's a way that, as long as you're not doing it on purpose, like I said, it goes towards mockery and mimicking, like in a negative way, when you're purposefully doing it. When you're like pointing out someone's like your unlikableness towards someone, or like you don't agree with how someone's talking, or yada yada, whatever you have developed in your brain as a reason to mock, which there's no reason to. But don't ever feel guilty for, feeling like you give into certain social interactions, certain social situations. You're just like, your brain's just telling you to kind of ease into it. I think we all want to always do our best to kind of like adapt when we're talking to people, and you always want to do your best to have like meaningful conversations, not necessarily, not like deep personal conversations, but meaningful. You want to have meaningful interactions with others. So whether it's like, you just want to be likable to a sense. just like what I was talking about earlier with popularity. But it's just you mirror people just as an unconscious thing. You're just copying people to make it a little easier. I don't know how often I can reiterate that. Really, I think I often I've done that a lot of 100%. I think sometimes it leads with a little bit of that. You want acceptance, right? You want to have a certain acceptability with people, so you do it because. But if you're also smart enough, you know that like it's not always going to work out, and not the sense that like people are going to think you're fake always, or maybe people do, but not. It's not what it's going to be necessarily. It's just sometimes like you're just not going to vibe with a certain social interaction, and you might have wanted to try, and because of this person, and they have a certain friend group or certain social group that you try to vibe with them, and you try to be be them, and be a little more eased into it, but it's not always going to vibe with people. And so just it's not unauthentic. You're always you. Just make sure you're always staying good on what you are. And it's people are so different that it's just going to happen naturally. It feels like you're just going to like talk to people a little differently. You're going to want to interact with people a little differently. I think it's just the nature of being human. So it's just funny that like that's just something that we all do. It's just a way to personalize yourself. It really is. I keep reiterating it. Like I don't know what else to say really. Like it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to have like these certain like to do it. Like I said, you could do it verbally. You could do it non-verbally. It's just about having that better back and forth, better conversations, just more genuine interactions with other people. One of my favorite things to kind of think about in the world is I love thinking about like how ancient humans lived. That's one thing I think is how interesting is how far we've kind of come, and based off of like the things we use in our everyday to day lives, and the way we interact and the way we do things. It's kind of interesting to think about how we used to do things and how far it's come. And I recently read an article that I thought was kind of cool. And I don't know. I always don't know how real some of these articles are, but I'm already like doubting the article as I'm saying it. But nonetheless, it gave a lot of like, it was an article that was kind of talking about the origin of clothing, which I thought was funny. I never really thought about like, I guess I never really thought about how like ancient hominids, like cavemen and like Neanderthals, I guess I never really thought about what they wore. And we nowadays we kind of have purposes for certain clothing, right? It's like you wear like during the winter you wear thicker clothing, and you wear shorts during the summertime, and maybe you wear a hat because your head's a little cold, or like you like to wear hats because it's fashionable. Like a lot of things are fashionable nowadays, but clothing wasn't always like that. I was reading this article. It was done by the Atlantic, and it was just talking about like kind of going from like basic like function where they just needed it for specific reasons to eventually it holding a different significance in life. And so I tried my best to do a little research. I always just kind of list things, you know what I'm saying? But um as we kind of as ancient hominids were, like at one time we were primates, so we used to have fur, but then eventually through evolution and through whatever else, we needed bare skin. I think mostly because of like the arid conditions that were like around the world at some places. It was like, especially like in Africa or whatever, fur wasn't useful. It would ancient hominids would get too sweaty, so like bare skin was like an evolution thing. So clothing it was needed in all seven continents eventually, as like ancestors started to like expand in a way, right? Like I said, as we change as humans, like we also changed in our environments. Everything people started going places because of XYZ. We don't know how they thought they were old, ancient, dead people. But there was like, we had ancient ancestors living in Siberia or like crossing the Bering Sea 20,000 years ago. And unfortunately, we don't have like any surviving clothing from like that far back. They said in the article that the oldest bit of clothing is 5,000 years old. It's the Tarkan dress, which was found in the Tarkan cemetery out in Egypt. 1913 was found. So pretty cool, but that's 5,000 years old, which still, like I said, there was 20,000 years ago, people were crossing the Bering Sea, right? So, like, the thing about 5,000 is amazing. 20,000 is impossible. And with a lot of things, like, it feels like a lot of primitive clothing were like straight, like hides. And there wasn't a lot of techniques for preserving that, or like things were like plant fibers. So, a lot of things were going to rot away. Those things are just rotting away. And there's very little physical traces of actual pieces of clothing, but there are definitely like 100% some indirect examples. This article is kind of pointing out that like one thing they had, they were talking about lice, which I thought was funny. And we know that like through a lot of like our research nowadays, we know that like body lice and head lice don't ever cross paths. They're, particular to the specific hairs on your part of the body. But in 2011, geneticists determined the concept of clothing because of lice, that they had to somehow move from the head to the body. Like they just somehow, because of like there wasn't a lot of fur and eventually it was all on your head. And so like how is it going to go on the little bit of like hair you have on your body? And so that was kind of interesting. Through that migration of lice, they can kind of determine that. And I don't necessarily not agree with that. And also like certain like if you're a little musky, lice may be a little bit easier to get onto you. But Homo sapiens, like who we kind of spawned from, we're not the first to invent clothing. Even further back, like archaic humans may have worn clothing. There were some. They were talking about some caves in China and Spain that were as old as 800,000 years old, that had stone tools and other tools, but like specifically there were some stone tools that resembled like scrapers for hides. You know what I'm saying? Which was pretty cool. And that's all. And this is all based off of like what they can think and what they can only project as like the purpose of those things. We really don't know how they used them, but it was similar to other tools they had found. And then like there was Germany, there a 300,000-year-old like scraper was discovered as well, and apparently that scraper was found alongside bare bones, and there was cuts kind of implying in the bones that were kind of implying a skinning. Like I said, only concurrent with what we know now. And Neanderthals in Europe hundreds of thousands of years ago, before Homo sapiens, they found like polished deer ribs used to dry skin. And it's like I said, not necessarily always accurate, but based off of like what we know through evolution of how humans that we do know about, and we of cultures that we do know a little bit more about, evolution kind of only brings you towards that. And like I said, it's only what we speculate, but because of the resemblance, it's hard not to think about like maybe they did, because there was a time when you know we had fur and we didn't need clothing, but eventually the bare skin was it wasn't going to protect you from serious winters or anything like that, right? So especially in some of those places like Germany or China where it gets kind of cold, like it makes sense. In some parts of Europe, it just does make sense. But it acts like when like asking when would ancient humans need clothing is kind of like it's when people are spanning around the world. It's kind of what they were saying. As early humans lost fur, around because of arid environments. Sorry, I'm stuttering. But that's a big reason. The sweating. We know that humans sweat excessively, way more than any other animal. So like the bear skin helps us. It literally is what prevents us from like overheating. So we know that like as like evolution, sweat glands started developing, and as like humans developed as well as into like more complex humans. That's something that happened. That was something that was needed, or fur was not needed anymore. You needed bare skin. But eventually that was kind of a maladaptation, especially during the Ice Age, which ended 10,000 years ago. Like, even though, like, we had, they didn't have fur, like, that was going to suck. Like, they might have been pretty hairy beings, you know what I'm saying? That's gotta suck to then survive in the Ice Age, which was one of the worst time periods in, our history of the world as we know it. So Neanderthals would have needed to cover 80% of their body to stay warm, which is crazy. As like what kind of humans need to do nowadays, we need to cover a lot of our bodies just to stay warm. So the article was kind of talking about like maybe some of the most basic kind of styles of clothing is like, as we know, are kind of like shawls and loincloths, right? Literally just basic pieces of fabric, cut skin that like hang over you, that drape over you, which would have probably been good enough for most times. And that would have been like described as like simple clothing. Which nowadays we have kind of complex clothing. That's kind of what we are now. We have more complex stuff, and we use things for specific purposes. Eventually, like they would have probably wanted to do different things with things, right? Eventually, they probably would have had more fitted clothes, but when, right? Like when. It fitted clothes would have been better for warmth because it would have like enclosed part like around your ankles, around your wrist, and around your neck, and there wouldn't be a draft and stuff like that. And there would have been like new tools that started to develop, like eye needles, like sewing needles and stuff like that. And the oldest eye needles were found like 30,000 plus years ago, or like that's how old they date back. So at least we might know that like they started having more complex clothing around 30,000 years ago, even though there might be traces to clothing and hides hundreds of thousand years ago, which is crazy, which is cool. But after the ice age, thermal function would have been less needed in some parts of the world. So those furs would have been kind of heavy, probably. Those furs would have been like just like straight up like, heavy, like, straight from the animal, draped over you as like a big blanket, big snuggie, basically. It would have been too hot for some places. So that's when I think the more like fitted complex clothing where it was like, more trimmed and more sewn off and, sleeves or no sleeves and stuff like that. Fashion, you know what I'm saying? The archaic fashion. But the clothes started to take a social significance eventually. Eventually, things also started being lighter in fabric and things were a little bit easier to wear, woven fibers, like things like that became like, as part of the advancements of society. Climate and clothing have, I think, been most linked. That's always kind of where the origin of clothing comes from climate. It feels like that's the most, basic thing. Because like, if you live in an air condition, you don't want anything to sit on you. Anywhere hot, you'd rather be naked. Obviously, now it's like it's a social thing, so you don't want to be naked. But like, it's one of those things where like they wouldn't need to protect themselves just for survival. So people that were going through the ice age, which was everybody around the world, and some people who were crossing into those more like frigid, temperatures, were in definite need. And clothing is uniquely human too, which is so funny to think. I never thought about that. We stick sweaters on dogs and animals, but they don't wear clothes. You know, Winnie the Pooh, he's not a real bear. He's a stuffed animal. Just kidding. Sorry. Smokey the Bear, he's wearing pants and a hat. That don't make no sense. Whatever. I'm sorry. But I just never thought about like I love thinking about like ancient humans. That's one of my favorite things to think about. I think it's kind of cool to think about how we used to live, but you don't think about like where clothes came from. Now we just kind of we wear things for fashion or you wear things for practicality. Like when it's cold outside, you wear more layers, and when it's hotter outside, you wear like something with short sleeves. So now we have a different purpose for things, and it only kind of makes sense. I mean, like that's how cavemen and Neanderthals have always been kind of portrayed as like, having these big thick furs that they drape over them, and that's kind of what they wear. That's kind of like that's the clothing of what they have, and but giving a little bit of that more of that connection to history. There's some basis for what people know. And with the founding of tools, with like things like the scrapers, like or supposedly found scrapers, obviously we don't know what they were using them for, but also with things like the needles and like things like that. And we just know that there was an evolution eventually, and as we know, like fabrics and fibers are very very thin and very fine now. It's just kind of cool to think about that stuff. And honestly, like I appreciate clothing. I'm more of a practical clother nowadays. Like, I'm kind of just like as long as I stay warm and I stay comfortable, that's kind of where I look for in my clothing. I don't care about fashion necessarily, but yeah. But there's got to be there were some trendsetter Homo sapiens, that, no doubt, some trendsetting Neanderthals that they wore their shawls a little shorter than others. Their loincloths were a little bit tighter than other people's. Whatever. I think it's just cool to think about the origin of clothing. Alrighty, friends, that's really all I have to say about that. Episode 41, a little bit shorter than episode 40, but nonetheless in the bag. I appreciate everybody for tuning in as always. If you want to listen to this episode, episode 41, or any of my past episodes, or any future episodes, I always make sure to upload them on YouTube as well as Spotify. If you find anything I say relatable or enjoyable in any way, then I always appreciate a little support. If you wanted to, subscribe to my YouTube channel, if you want to follow me on Spotify, you could also follow me on a few different social medias. I have a Instagram, I have Facebook, I also have Twitter. I'll make sure to link those down in the video description as well as my channel description, any bios I have really. But nonetheless, I always appreciate the chance to get on the microphone and talk to y'all. Try to say that every week, but I truly mean it. This episode's a little shorter than last week's. I was cruising a little bit with this episode. Just didn't feel like I needed to say as much. And I've planned out these episodes a little bit better, and I think with a little bit better research, and I kind of got a more of a rhythm with things. Like I said, I'm just trying to do my best with that stuff. And I appreciate all the love I've been getting. I'm doing my best to try to expand the content beyond podcasting and trying to personalize myself a little bit more and really try to show myself more. And it feels a little bit weird to have a voice on a podcast and be a little faceless at times. But yeah, I love y'all nonetheless. Be sure to tell someone that you love them as well. Make sure to show up for yourselves every single day and be excellent to each other.